GMS and AMS, Mr. Scott back here today. So I'll get into directions. You need to watch the video for directions for today. But I'm also going to just quickly review over some of the information. We saw that on Monday's STEMscopedias that everybody was having a hard time with especially number question 2 this week and question 2 last week. And so we just thought it'd be a great idea to revisit some of those things and me just explain it to you. So question 1 this week on Monday asked about how short and long-term environmental changes would affect organisms and traits in future generations. So first of all, let's just talk about what is a short-term environmental change, what's a long-term environmental change. So here's what short-term environmental changes are. Short-term environmental changes are usually caused by natural disasters such as wildfires, drought, or floods. They're short-term. They don't last forever. Wildfires may come through a forest and they may be put out in a month or a few weeks. They don't last forever, so they are short-term environmental changes. Same with drought. We may have a drought here for 3 or 4 or 5 months. It may last a year or two, but it's still short-term compared to what long-term changes may be. So in these short-term environmental changes, organisms may have to temporarily move from certain areas to find more food or to find water or shelter in another area. But they can also move back after that short-term environmental change has happened. So it may displace them, but it's not as permanent. Now, what happens with short-term environmental changes is we call it secondary succession. So we already have soil, we already have nutrients. And if a drought or a flood comes through or a fire, it may wipe out the trees and the grasses, but the soil is still there. And so it's pretty quickly that vegetation can come back, and bushes and trees and things like that can come back for shelter. They can come back for food sources, and that is secondary succession. Now, let's talk about long-term changes. So long-term environmental changes include certain things like clear cutting of forests for agriculture. That forest is no longer there. It wasn't just cut down and regrown. It was cut down and turned into agriculture. So what was once there, as far as a source of food and shelter and even water, now is no longer there. And so we consider that a long-term change. Also, encroachment of humans, housing developments, things like that. Those are long-term. Okay, you're not going to build a house and 2 months later say, nope, all right, we're done with that house. Let's let the trees grow back. No, that is a long-term change when we encroach on the environment for whatever reasons. We're businesses and developments and golf courses and all those things that are a part of humanity's lives. So those are long-term changes. We're not going back to the original. Okay. Another long-term change I would say is, let's just leave it at that for now. So when long-term changes happen, then organisms have to adapt. Now, a lot of them might be displaced, but more than likely, that is when you have to have adaptations. Adaptations can be behavioral adaptations, meaning they change what they eat, where they sleep. They may be genetic, so change of color, skin color, size, resistance to chemicals. So that's question 2 we'll talk about in a second. These adaptations occur over many, many generations. So after these many generations, these adaptations are so that those organisms can find the best traits for survival in that new environment, because it's a long-term change, and then pass those traits on to their offspring. So, all right. So that was number 1 on Monday, and hopefully you understand the difference between short and long term a little better now as far as environmental changes. So question 2 would be really short here because I kind of already covered it. Question 2 refers to people spraying pesticides to get rid of insects and destroy crops. Well, if you watched my video earlier, you realize that was one of my first jobs, actually. So then we're going to state that the question then states that insects are becoming resistant to these pesticides. And the question says, is this a human-induced change? So are insects adapting to short-term or long-term environmental changes? So let's just quickly talk about adaptations, and this is what happens. So we've been spraying insects for 70 plus years. Humans have been spraying insects that feed on crops, that we grow for food. Not all insects are killed by these chemicals. Over time, some of these insects develop resistance to the chemicals, and they survive. Well, those insects that survive then pass that resistance on to their offspring. So now their offspring also survives those pesticides. And then the offspring after that also survive. So that is a genetic trait that they are surviving. And when they pass it on to enough, then us as humans are like, wait, our crops, we're not able to kill all these insects. We need to start using a different chemical. And so that's what happens with spraying pesticides and how adaptations play a role with that. Plants are the same way. We use Roundup to kill weeds. We use stuff to kill poison ivy and all kinds of things. Well, if they become resistant to what we are spraying them with, then that will become an adaptation, and we'll have to create new stuff to spray them with. Bacteria is the same way. Bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics, and so then you have to take medicine that is different and stronger to beat that infection. And so, but anyways, those are a couple questions on Monday's Google Doc with Stemscopedia. I just wanted to explain them a little more in depth. We just had a lot of wrong answers this week on short and long term, and you have a quiz today. So here's your quiz, Stemscopedia, 6 questions. Only 6 questions, I believe. So go ahead and go on to Stemscopedia, answer your 6 questions. You can use all your notes for that and turn it in, and you are done for today. Y'all have a great weekend.